We shall now proceed with the presentation of reports. In this regard, I have been informed that, unfortunately, due to health-related reasons, Dr. Arjun Sengupta, the chairperson, rapporteur of the Working Group on the Right to Development, is not able to be with us today to present the report of the Working Group in person. It is therefore my pleasure to invite Mr. Craig Mokhiber of the Research and Right to Development Division of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to deliver the statement on his behalf.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have the honor to present the statement of Dr. Arjun Sengupta, Chairperson Rapporteur of the Working Group on the Right to Development. And the statement begins, Mr. President, distinguished delegates and observers, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to address the Human Rights Council to present the report of the 11th session of the Working Group on the Right to Development, which took place last April. The full report of the session is contained in Document A, HRC 1523. As you know, a high-level task force composed of 5 independent experts was established in 2004 in order to provide an expert advice to the deliberations of the Working Group. This year, the task force presented a set of 3 substantive reports for consideration by the Working Group. These 3 reports respectively covered A, the suggestions from the task force for further work in the realization of the right to development, B, the consolidation of the main findings of the task force over the past 5 years of its mandate, and C, a set of criteria and operational sub-criteria in contribution to the elaboration of a comprehensive and coherent set of standards for the implementation of the right to development. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, next week the UN Summit will convene in New York to review the status of achievements in reaching the Millennium Development Goals. In this context, allow me to highlight 2 of several observations and findings of the task force pertinent to the MDG's review and the future work in the realization of the right to development. Firstly, Millennium Development Goal 8, with its focus on international cooperation, is a framework consistent with international responsibilities as outlined in the Declaration on the Right to Development. In this context, and as recommended by the Working Group, the task force engaged in constructive dialogue and collaboration with multilateral institutions responsible for some 12 global partnerships in the area of development aid, trade, access to medicines, debt sustainability, and transfer of technology. As a result, the task force has concluded that none of these global partnerships was established as a direct consequence of commitment to Goal 8. Nonetheless, they do tend to see themselves as contributing to that goal. None has a mandate to promote the right to development, but nevertheless they are among the array of right to development stakeholders and have sometimes acknowledged that this right is pertinent, but have more commonly considered it as a matter of interagency information sharing rather than policy guidance. The task force therefore drew the attention of the Working Group to the difficulty for many development partnerships to introduce the right to development considerations as such in their policies and programs. This and other obstacles to progress in implementing the right to development, to which the task force drew our attention, must be addressed by the international community for development practice to be informed by this right. The Working Group, drawing on the work of the task force, remains hopeful that it can make progress in this regard with the support of the Human Rights Council. Secondly, the achievement of the MDGs will require an enabling environment at all levels, as is the full and effective realization of the right to development. All states must endeavor to take steps, both individually and collectively, to establish, promote, and sustain national and international arrangements that create such an enabling environment. In order to assess the extent of such commitment and action by states, the task force proposed a set of criteria and operational sub-criteria strictly adhering to the Declaration's reference to national development policies in Article 2, international development policies in Article 4, and to the, quote, creation of national and international conditions favorable to the realization of the right to development, end quote, from Article 3. Not all delegations accepted that there was an adequate balance of national and international policy considerations, which, in my view, is more a sign of unresolved political differences among regional groups than of the value of the criteria and of the operational sub-criteria. It was therefore necessary to allow government sufficient time to review thoroughly the work of the task force. I would like to echo the strong urging of the chair of the task force for the regional groups to bridge their differences in order to fulfill their commitment to the Millennium Summit, quote, to making the right to development a reality for everyone, end quote. These and other recommendations of the task force inform the deliberations of the working group, which ended its work with consensus adoption of conclusions and recommendations. In this context, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all groups and delegations for the substantive contributions to the deliberations of the working group, and especially for their tireless and successful efforts to reach consensus. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to draw your attention to the conclusions and recommendations of the 11th session of the working group, which are contained in paragraphs 42 to 47 of Document A, HRC 1523. The working group concluded that work had been undertaken by the task force on criteria and sub-criteria for the implementation of the right to development, and that further work should be undertaken at the intergovernmental level to adequately reflect both the national and international dimensions. To this end, the working group decided that additional time was needed for consideration and pronouncement by governments on the substance of the work of the task force and on the way forward. With respect to recommendations, firstly, the working group invited member states and other stakeholders to share their views on the work of the task force and on the way forward. In this respect, the Secretariat has informed me that they notified member states in July that all the 3 reports of the task force were made available on the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and in all official UN languages. Finally, the working group requested that I, in my capacity as the chairperson rapporteur of the working group, prepare 2 compilations of the submissions received from governments, groups of governments, and regional groups, as well as the inputs received from other stakeholders with the assistance of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Upon the endorsement of these recommendations of the working group by the Council at this session, I will seek for submissions for the above-mentioned 2 compilations. Before I conclude, I would like to thank the High-Level Task Force for the rigor and commitment it brought to its efforts to advance the implementation of the right to development, including the criteria and operational sub-criteria, as well as its suggestions on the way forward. I believe that the outcome of the task force's work over the past 5 years has laid the groundwork for consideration and reflection by member states in the course of the year ahead and for further deliberations by the working group during its next session in 2011. In my view, this process will be an important phase toward the realization and operationalization of the right to development, and I would request the Human Rights Council to endorse this phase of consultation and deliberation. In conclusion, I would like to thank the Human Rights Council for its cooperation and sustained support for the working group. So ends the statement, Mr. President, of Chairperson Rapporteur Dr. Arjun Sengupta. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.